In this video, you'll learn how to complete Assessment 2 case study for BSB FIM 501 and BSB FIA 412. So here we have a series of different profit and loss statements for a company called Amelia's Coffee Shop. You can imagine that Amelia runs a typical coffee shop that sells coffee, tea and other beverages, as well as sandwiches, cake and so forth. Just think of a typical coffee shop. Down the bottom we have three different statements. The first one is for March 2019, then April 2019 and May 2019. Your assessment questions are on the final spreadsheet. These same questions are also in your workbook. Up the top we have some extra information. Amelia has requested you to review the last 3 months' profit and loss of her coffee shop and provide answers relating to May 2019. A reward and recognition program has been implemented to staff to encourage upselling. So for example, if a customer were to buy a coffee, the staff member might ask if they would like a large coffee instead of a small one, or maybe even add-on sale, like would they like cake with their coffee. There is an assumption that the only variable costs are casual wages, and across these 3 months, a customer loyalty scheme has been introduced, where if a customer buys 5 coffees, they get 1 free. So these extra items of information may influence some of your answers to the questions below. Let's go back to March 2019 and have a look at Amelia's Coffee Shop's Statement of Financial Performance, or profit and loss. So at the top we have the revenue, and we can see there's a budget as well as an actual. There's a place to record the variance in dollars, so what was the difference between budget and actual, and a variance in percentage, which will be automatically calculated. So the first line is coffee shop sales, so selling coffee, tea and so forth. The next is cost of goods sold, which is the costs directly related to producing the coffee, the cake, etc., ingredients and so forth. From there we get the gross profit, and this is given to you in terms of budget and actual. The areas in yellow are things that you'll have to calculate in order to answer some of the questions. We'll look at that in a moment. Down the bottom, as with all profit and loss, we have the expenses. So here we have occupancy expenses, electricity and so forth, employment related to the staff, marketing expenses, general administration expenses, which leads to the total expenses. We then have the net profit at the bottom. So just remembering, gross profit is less cost of goods sold, net profit is less all of the expenses or overheads, and we have those across 3 time periods. So let's look at the first question. Calculate the variance in column E for March. So let's go to March, and we're looking at column E and we're looking for the variance. So the sales budget was $45,000, the actual is $40,500, so we have a $500 variance. And you'll see that the percentage is automatically calculated. So for question 1, you need to go down that variance column and deduce all of those different variances for all the different items. For question 2, what is the gross profit percentage for May, and what trend can you identify in relation to the previous months? So we're interested in this gross profit percentage, and then we're going to compare it in April and compare it in March. So starting with March, how do we calculate this? An easy way to do it is using a formula within Excel. So here I go equals the gross profit divided by the sales. So we can see the gross profit as a percentage is 60%. If I hold this little box and draw it across, that will show us the actual percentage as well. Here it's the same, which is fine. So you'll need to use that same technique across all of these different statements. So here gross profit divided by coffee shop sales, extend it all the way across, and that will end up giving you your answer. Once you have that, then you discuss what sort of trend it is. Question 3 asks for possible reasons to explain a change in gross profit. And in answering this, you might even think about some of those conditions or extra bits of information we have up the top. But let's first revisit gross profit. So the main thing to remember is if you're trying to figure out reasons for a change in gross profit, they're going to be associated with costs of goods sold. So if one of your answers as to a change of gross profit is something to do with electricity bills or wages or anything down in this expenses area, your answer will be incorrect. It has to be around the actual inputs or raw materials that go into actually making the product that the organisation sells. So remember, gross profit is up the top, net profit is down the bottom. So just check your answer there. Question 4, what does a study of previous months tell you about the revenue trends? So here we look at the revenue across the top, and you're wanting to follow the coffee shop sales and look at what trends are appearing across time. So you can do that, and then that will help you to answer that question. List 3 possible reasons to explain a difference, or in this case an increase in revenue. So once again, you might like to look at the extra information that will give you clues, but think about things like the type of business it is, maybe the time of year, and from there you may be able to deduce some reasonable answers as to why there could be an increase in revenue. Question 6, are any of the budgets for May unreasonable, and explain? So with this one, you're going to have to look at all 3 statements and look for differences. So let's have a look at May. Here we have, for example, electricity. So the budget was 500 and the actual was 1,000. So we have a big difference here. They've actually paid double the bill. So what we need to do is go back and figure out why that may be the case. So let's have a look at March. The budget was 500 and the actual was 500. Great. April, the budget was 500, but we can see here the actual was nothing. Someone forgot to pay that bill, and there's a variance of $500. So from there, you should be able to make a reasonable guess as to what's happened here in May in order to answer the question. So you need to go through the spreadsheets and look for any other differences. Why do you think that electricity expense in May is so much more than the budget for May? Well, pretty much we just looked at that one, and you should be able to find an answer. But for all of these ones where they're asking about differences, you need to look across the 3 spreadsheets. Question 8 is, are there any expenses that the finance team might have forgotten to calculate and include in May? Explain. So we're looking at expenses. So you'll be looking in this bottom section and looking for any errors, anything they've missed or forgotten across those different time periods. Number 9, how has workers' compensation been calculated, and explain why it is over budget for May? So I'm going back to March, and let's have a look at workers' compensation. This is under employment expenses. So here we have a budget of 300 and an actual of 298. So the first thing to figure out is how has it actually been calculated. Looking at this, it's likely to be a percentage of one of these figures. So you'll need to deduce exactly how that's been calculated. We can see here there's differences to figure out what has happened there. When you figure out the percentage, make sure you record that in your answer. Question 10, the company has been increasing the advertising of their services over the past few months. Do you think the increased cost has been financially beneficial, and if so, by how much? So let's go back to March here, and we're interested in advertising. So we have a budget of 2,000 and an actual spend of 2,250. So they're definitely overspending in advertising. Let's have a look at April. Here, budget 2,000, actual is 2,500, and May, advertising 2,000, actual 2,800. So we can see that over time they're spending more on advertising. So what we would be interested in is whether that advertising is actually increasing sales. So you'll need to look at the correlation between the advertising expenditure and the amount of extra sales they're getting for that extra expenditure. So you might look at that as a percentage, for example, and figure out if that extra money spent is actually translating in to extra sales. 11, why is repairs and maintenance so over budget for May? Again, you will look at the different months for repairs and maintenance and figure out why that might be the case. Just think of a reasonable response that would indicate what's been going on for that organisation. Number 12, after making the necessary adjustments to the statements, would you evaluate the real net profit performance this month, meaning May, as better, the same or worse than previous months? Explain. So the first part of this says after making the necessary adjustments. So what you'll need to do is go through these statements and fix up anything that's wrong. So for example, we already identified that the actual payment out on electricity in April should have been $500. So you would actually write $500 here in order to fix it up. So you'll need to go through and make all the changes to anything that's wrong. Once you've done that, then you'll need to make sure that these total expenses and net profit figures down the bottom are actually correct. Just be aware that in Excel, some of these things may have a formula attached and some may not. So just double check that all the formulas are working correctly in this section. So once you've fixed up all of those errors, then you can have a look across the different real net profit performance, and then you should be able to tell how the company's going in order to answer that question. Question 13, identify at least 3 items that would attract GST at a cafe or coffee shop. So here you'll need to go online and look up the ATO website, the Australian Tax Office website, about GST and what items attract GST, and then look at what that organisation is selling, what they buy to make their coffee and sandwiches and cake and so forth, and identify some things that wouldn't attract GST. Just think of what a typical coffee shop would buy and sell to answer that question. In your workbook is a link to the ATO website, or you can find it through Google or internet search. Item 14, provide a process flow chart for administration staff to follow that will ensure Amelia's coffee shop meets all ATO requirements, that's Australian Tax Office requirements, for financial record keeping. So we want to make sure that this organisation is compliant with their record keeping. Your answer should at a minimum state what records must be kept, where to store them, and for how long they must be kept. So make sure you answer at least those 3 components when you develop this process flow chart. So to develop the process flow chart, you can do it in a program like Microsoft Word, maybe using SmartArt or Visio, but you can also just hand draw the process, take a photo and paste that into your workbook. But it needs to be a process flow, like with boxes and arrows, showing what the administration staff need to do and why they need to do it. Remember, you can answer all of these questions directly into your workbook or in the spreadsheet. Either way, just make sure you submit your answers. Remember to review the different information up the top, as that will also help you to find some answers to the questions.